Wake up, Canadian subjects. I'm going to do MK Ultra as it really is. I have read everything there is and ever has been on the subject. If you ever want to know, a writer, an American journalist who was the absolute epicenter of it, it's Hunter S. Thompson, Where the Buffalo Roam, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and on and on. There's been Hollywood galore on this. There's been so many movies, sodium penthol, I didn't even say it right, but it goes on. And I take Russia and USA in this post, and this is all on my actually was favorite president until along came Donald J. Trump. I've always been fascinated and a real absolute diehard fan of Richard Nixon. When everyone hated him, I've always loved that president of the United States. That's me. I have my reasons. For my longest term followers, they all know why. When I get into Canada, and this is really personable for me, so Americans who watch this, you wouldn't understand because you're not subjugated. Your British North America is way, 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 way in your ancestors' past. It's not even a part of your DNA really anymore. I'm not trying to be rude or, and I have to be careful how I talk in Oxford Webster. And I know it can be, the English can be wrong. And I'm not the best at linguistics, but I'm good at this. And for Canadians, we're subjects in this country. We're not real citizens. Our Citizenship Act doesn't go through that. Now, the beautiful thing about Richard Nixon, what I love being a subjugated Canadian, is that he articulated so much on the world stage in relation to Israel, and he stood up to Israel. And this part of Republicans today, I don't think understand where us who are subjugated really see the problem with Israel and its 10 basic laws, 2018. And I've highlighted that as your president, one of the greatest Republican presidents of all time, Richard Nixon, who was put down. He went through everything Trump did. Trump even agrees. Richard Nixon, he just said last week, Richard Nixon was scammed. I've always said that. I've always known it to be true. He made a mistake. And I think he was set up to make that mistake. And it was during the height of USA and Soviet Union. And yes, MK Ultra, that Richard Nixon put down in his presidency before Watergate and all of it. And yes, along come Hunter S. Thompson, who was doing all the list of MK Ultra drugs. He carried them around with him in a briefcase. He actually even threatened the president, Richard Nixon, on a plane. And he actually grabbed Richard Nixon while he was urinating in the plane, went into the bathroom, grabbed him. And Richard Nixon was I'm going to watch my words on this one because I tagged Russia and it's specific to the United States. But he stood up for himself. I'm just going to say that. And he pushed back and he actually answered Hunter, who was high as a kite. The whole silly thing of it, I'm sorry, everybody, Canadian, Americans, when it comes to the MK Ultra of the United States and what the CIA did and what Russians did the same program. SVC is the CIA. That's why I tagged Russia in this. It's a real embarrassment for the American government and the Russian government. It was really silly what they thought they could achieve with really far out drugs that actually Richard Nixon did away with world legislation he brought forward in the United Nations Security Council under his ambassador, and it was the Convention on Psychedelic Drugs, ending all of that, 1973. You get caught messing around with that or forcing that on any American, you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life. Literally 25 years. And people have in America. Same thing with the Soviet Union. I'm sorry. I know Hollywood movies, sodium penthol, and all these things. They're not truth serums. They never worked. There's no truth to that. It really is silly. There are disgraceful things the Russians and Americans did with homeless and drug addicts, especially those addicted to heroin. It is true. Opiate addicted, it is true what they got them to take so that they could have access to their drugs. Yes, CIA and the Soviet Union's SVC did these things. But much, much worse than that, on the level of Adolf Hitler, on all the evil atrocities committed on Jews, Poles, Romanians, Gypsies, handicaps from Nazi Germany, was completed by the constitutional monarchy of Canada. Long before Nazi Germany, everybody. Long after. Long before MK Ultra. I can tell you in Alberta, where I was accused by the Democrats and the black organizations in the United States, we've since made amends. And literally, there's a rapper, several of them, and a current leader who had over 80,000 Americans thinking somehow I crafted the Heritage Foundation and I was instrumental in that. In Alberta independence, people were threatening to kill me in the United States of America. And I'm like, you guys know I'm under middle class in Canada. I have no security team. I'm not famous. I'm not even wealthy. I'm below middle class in Canadian respect, well below any concept of what an American calls middle class. And then actually, we all made amends. There was an X space, and everything came, and they said, we're sorry. We know you're innocent, and thank you for all the work you've done. Thank you for going through so many things and sharing light on all these things. And so I'm not going to go into too much on that. But folks, realistically, it was an embarrassment in the American and Russian systems. They never achieved any of the things they wanted to. Hunter S. Thompson actually made fun of the American government and led that charge. I'm sorry if you haven't read all those books. I've read them all entirely. Watched every single movie series. Watched the enlightened one of Bill Murray's character, 1981, Where the Buffalo Roam. Of course, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And there's many, many more. The true story and what Hunter S. Thompson did, and even took over an American town. Took it over. One mayor of an American town was administering drugs everywhere, getting everyone high in mental hospitals, doing the MK Ultra after the fact. And Richard Nixon shut it all down on the world stage. So did the Russians. And they passed that. They have the most stringent, strict psychedelic drug legislation everywhere. There's a song on cocaine and hashish. I don't even qualify in there. But the CIA were running that too. That's not a truth serum. I'm sorry. And I'm not going to get into it. I have police and military clearance. I'm not going to get into my life, my youth, and everything else. But realistically, folks, none of those things in Hunter S. Thompson's bag, MK Ultra's bag, is anywhere near a truth serum. I just know from my own life, my own experiences. Sorry if that upsets people. I'm not going to get into any details because I'm not going to compromise myself, but I can tell you it's very silly. What isn't silly is the comatose, the absolute retardation of people in Canada since the 1920s, long before Nazi Germany, on a real sadistic version of an MK Ultra that they ran off the charts on in Canada until USA and the Soviet Union shut it down. there is nothing in the United States outside of heroin addicts and absolutely opium addicts in the United States that remotely comes close or comparable to the programs ran in Canada. Even in Alberta, Canada, long before the United States ever got involved, 1952 to 1973, and even Canada much after, to yes, First Nations experiments like Nazi Germany, a runaway, not CIA approved or led MK Ultra. What Canada did long before MK Ultra and long after is off the charts. It was actually the program that Nazi Germany used. They learned it. And I've taught this years ago in great detail. I've even taught Japan coming to Canada to learn these systems of human rights, atrocities, and abuses. If you think SVC and CIA are somehow instrumental in all of this, no. They learned off the Canadian model, no different than Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany is not the first model. And when I prove that, I'm just going to say black organizations in the United States, strong foundation, I'll just give you that hint, strong foundational attached to the Democrats. When I provided all that and I showed them all of it in truth and how I have no ties to that, in fact, have done nothing but publish against all of that, stood against all of that clearly in publication. I know my country's socialist, and I know my country's absolutely fascist. The country is, the system is, all the Canadian politicians are, and they will fall off the rails in any narrative that way, because that's the constitutional acts of Canada in our highest laws forever and a day. It's absolutely bound to the Indian Act and everything that Canada does with the First People. Oldest legislation and current living model in the entire world. You want to find the oldest playbook, legal playbook? It's called Canada. So Canadians, you're not a part of an MK Ultra from a CIA or a Russian SVC. They are just amateurs, honestly. And it was very silly and laughable. And it's not laughable. I shouldn't say that, so I got to be careful what I say, because it's not all laughable in those 2 decades of Soviet and United States, but they are amateurs and nowhere in comparison to the evil and disgust of how far it went in Canada long before they ever came into existence. Long before. Canada is instrumental, and depending on provinces, yes, through heritage, yes, through my province, Alberta, I know it to be true. I have no ties to that, no supports to that. I've always spoken out against it, and I'm clear in publication. I'm vindicated. And I'm sorry, folks, that's how bad it really is, much worse. And Canadians, you are a part of a monarchy. Never forget, you're Canada, the constitutional monarchy. A very sick and diseased model created, yes, by the British Empire that was a part of America's history 250 years ago until they broke away from British North America. And then you went deeper into it. You established your own constitutional monarchy, sick, diseased regime. You've been instituted throughout all of everything before the 13 colonies, during it, after independence, you kept going, and then you got into a worse scenario. Monarchies have been perfecting subjugation for 5,000 years. America is the new world order. The UN is the new world order. The old world order is what all Canadians are. You've been brainwashed, institutionalized under a diseased constitutional monarchy in the highest laws of the land, the soul of the nation, that takes away your soul as a human being. If you're even defined as a human being in this country, in our highest laws. Less than human or not even human being. I'm sorry, this is reality that you've been institutionalized into. It's not about MK Ultra, CIA, or Soviet Union SVC. Amateurs compared to the 5,000-year system of constitutional monarchies. And if you ever want to know about drugs, opiates, heroin, and who, well, just slap on that poppy that you love so much every Remembrance Day that no American or no Russian does. That's how far gone you are in Canada. I'm sorry. These are absolute, undeniable facts that there's no expert in the world to deny, because I have you dead to rights. As I'm going to say again, that foundational group in America, strong Democrats, that I was able to prove and vindicate myself after really being fearful of my life in New York. I was scared. I still did it anyway, but I was pretty fearful, and I'm glad they came around. But you know, when you get that far left side of things and they have no clue, and then they're like, why is this guy talking about Malcolm X? Why is he talking about Hunter S. Thompson? Why is he talking about Richard Nixon? Because I've read it all in its entirety. I know my own country in its entirety, and I know America's in its absolute entirety. Where the buffalo roam, then there's the buffalo soldiers. I've got all of that, and I lived it in real time, in real life, showcased for everybody. I'm just blessed. I have a large capacity to take in large volumes of things, and I can read a lot, and I do. Massive volumes compared to a large percentile of the population. God's gift to me, and I use it every day of my life as I make this video. I'm sorry if it bothers people. It's not about me. I know everything, you don't know anything. It's the fact that I've gone through all of these things in tremendous detail, more detail than anyone alive that I know of. I don't know anybody else. I've never met anybody else. When I sit down with people leading these big organizations way beyond me, they go, wow, like literally, and they have teams of people like that foundational group where they're like, we can do anything we want on you and blah blah. Said, go ahead. You're gonna find everything I tell you is truthful, and maybe you'll have a new appreciation for me, and you'll understand the Canadian subject a little bit better. And you know what? They do. And mum's the word now. Silence is bliss. It's golden. That's okay. I didn't get some big Democrat apology out on major platforms.